Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to review a book that I finished recently, and that is Art for the Ladylike, an autobiography through other lives by Whitney Otto. So if you're familiar with Whitney Otto, she is also a novelist, and she wrote the rather popular fiction book, How to Make an American Quilt, in the 1990s. And why I wanted to review this book is because I like to take really unique art books and share them in hopes that more people will read them. And I think that this book is a very unique, as it says on the title, autobiography, in that Whitney Otto shares her kind of personal interests, the people that the artists that she has found inspiring and that have kind of accompanied her through her own artistic journey as a writer. And she shares her own personal reflections on her life while sharing their lives with you as well. So it is, there's a lot of stuff going on in this book, and I think maybe for some people it would be too much, but I found it quite entertaining and it moved at a pretty good pace. There was a slight bit of repetition, which I think is a result of potentially the length of time it took her to write this book. She took a really long time to write this. I think it was over a decade, because she just kept getting pulled into other projects. And I think often with these types of books for authors, they just take longer to formulate in the mind, and the format is not always apparent when you first start writing them. So what Whitney Otto does is she weaves her story through 8 female photographers. So she seems very drawn particularly to photography in her art criticism and in her art experience. And a lot of the photographers in here, they're all female photographers, were ones whose work spoke to her, and she bought a postcard of it and kept it by her desk or in her dorm room or wherever she happened to be at the time. And then she would also, sometimes she met some of these people, sometimes she interacted with people who knew these people, and she weaves all those stories into this as well. And the other thing she's observing here is being an artist and being a mother. So that is really a big theme about this as well. And I thought her perspective on being an artist and a mother was very unique. Because she had never aspired to be a mother or to even be married. Actually, she talks a lot about her childhood and her parents and their dynamic was quite unique for the era in which she grew up, where her father was more of the caregiver, her mother was more of the breadwinner. So she has an interesting perspective from that. And then it shifts into her own perspective, where she is also the breadwinner in her relationship, and her husband stays home and is the primary caregiver to their son. So she talks about that. She talks about the kind of pull between motherhood and writing, and she talks about that for all of the artists in here. She relays their stories. She talks about their work in quite amazing detail. And it's just a very interesting way of looking at women's lives. And I think she brings up a lot of different points in here that I think are valid points. You know, the idea of being a bad mother, a good mother. She talks about Sally Mann, who took photographs of her children when they were young, often in the nude, which she received a lot of pushback for in her career. She talks about 8 different photographers, so I'll just list their names for you so that you know. So Sally Mann, Imogene Cunningham, Judy Dater, Ruth Orkin, Tina Mondati, Lee Miller, Madame Yvonne, and Greta Stern. So I had only really heard of 2 or 3 of these women before she talked about them here. And there's a lot of other artists that are woven into here as well, because of course when you're talking about art history or art movements, you have to kind of weave in other artists to put these artists in context. And so she does that quite well. There's, so much in here, like politics and relationships and just a lot of different perspectives that I found really beautifully illustrated, the way that art blends in with life. I think as an artist myself and working in the art industry, you often feel like things are very separated. And I know that industries really like to keep things segmented, but art and life do blend together. And I thought that that blending was really well illustrated in this book by Whitney Otto, and you really feel that sense of like, these are people with lives. They're not just artists pursuing careers. They also have lives. They also have conflicts. They also have challenges as they're moving through time. And I think that's why I love to read artist biography as well, because you want to see the context of an artist, not just through their work, but through their whole spectrum of living and loving and, struggle and happiness and all those things. And often art criticism really, narrows down into the work itself and kind of limits the perspective of looking at someone's work to the rest of art history, which is a valid way to look at it, of course, and is an important way to look at it. But I prefer to have a more wide, broad look at someone's life, especially as an artist mother myself. And I think it's important to examine the different aspects of being a woman that come up in your life and that impact your career. And, if you are pursuing an art career, a writer, a visual artist, even a dancer, I think that you could find some value in this book in terms of helping you to examine, eight women that did it a certain way. And then you can look at your own way and see if any of the things that they applied to how they did their careers would be helpful to you in helping you keep going. I also really appreciated Whitney Otto's views on feminism. She talked a little bit about realizing when she wasn't a radical. And in that sense, I think she also related Madame Yvonne to this. It was something that Madame Yvonne experienced as well, being coming of age in the suffragette movement, realizing that she didn't have what it took to be a suffragette, to go and protest, to hunger strike, to potentially be force-fed. That wasn't her skill set. And Whitney Otto speaks about her skill set in being a feminist as well. And I thought that was a really interesting idea when you're talking about activism, when you're talking about being, having opinions and wanting to change the world and show the world if it's doing something wrong, but you don't have that part of your personality that is confrontational or able to go out there and, protest, chain yourself to a tree or something like that, which is what a lot of people associate activism with. And Whitney Otto kind of delves into that a bit and talks about, I this is what I can do. I can do this, and I can talk to these people, and I can, sit on an artist panel and have people make assumptions about me and about my book because the book has quilt in the title. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was a very empowering thing to share because, we often, especially with the age of social media, compare ourselves to other people. We think that we should be doing all the things all the time. Like if we're not actively joining protests and writing letters and, activating at all times in order to pursue social justice, that we're not doing enough. And I think that if we can think about ourselves, think about who we are, and think about the best way that we can contribute towards causes that we believe in, rather than thinking we should do it the way other people are doing it, that is a very empowering perspective. And I really appreciated that about this book. I think Whitney Otto also shares this idea of women's ambition and how women pursue it in different ways based on their social conditions they're in in their time period, but also their own personality traits. And so I also, again, really appreciated that. So if you're interested in women artists, in the artist mother journey, and in, learning about another person, learning about Whitney Otto's life, but also these other 8 women, I would really encourage you to pick this up. I think it's a very unique book, and I found it quite lovely to read. It has kind of interesting little vignettes, quotes. It's quite easy to pick it up and put it down. And I would say my only criticism of it is that little bit of repetition that was happening. And I think sometimes if someone was, I think she may have been writing this more in an essay format. And so that can happen in essay formats and things where, they don't go back and edit out the repetitious things. Luckily, even though there was some repetitious storytelling, the stories weren't told exactly the same way in every section. So you still get a bit more information, or it's glossed over a bit more in other ones, but it is the same scenario that she's discussing. So take that with a grain of salt and make your decisions. But I do recommend reading Art for the Ladylike, an autobiography through other lives by Whitney Otto. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back again soon with another video.